Just try to hide. You fail to read.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Had a lovely email from Owen at Axiom. Stoked with the episode of the show, probably even more stoked at the fact that I gave him an order. That was probably more convenient, I suppose. But anyway, he said it was, he liked what I'd done. Said he'd pass it on to Barrelcraft Spirits. Haven't heard anything from them, but I'm guessing that obviously they well, they either haven't watched it or they basically were quite happy with it. So like I said, normally you only tend to hear from people when they're upset about what you've said anyway. But anyway, so yeah, last week was a bit of fun. On to this week's. As you can see, we're looking at some independent whiskey and from the independent bottling company Claxton's. Now it's been a long time since I've done an episode of the show on Claxton's. So for those of you who don't know, we have a bit of history. Back in about, I think it was about 2015, I had a phone call from a chap called Adrian Hoos. And Adrian basically explained the fact that his father, Jack, I think his name was, had retired, and they wanted to do something whiskey related, and they were thinking about setting up an independent bottling company. And so they were asking me, they were both into their whiskies but knew sort of Jack about the industry. Kill me. So they were asking me questions. I was giving them information and people they could contact and all that kind of stuff. And I assume they obviously did go off and do that. And I'm not taking credit for their success. Obviously, their success of the Claxton's brand is wholly down to their work. But I like to think I had a little part to play in it. And then so I didn't hear anything for about, I think it was about 12 months, something like that. And then had another phone call saying they'd actually got things off the ground, they'd got some bottlings done, fancy bottles and all this kind of stuff, and would I like to taste some samples? To my answer was, well, does the Pope what in the where? So we had quite a nice working relationship for a number of years. In actual fact, they'd send me samples, I'd taste them, I'd select the ones that I really liked, I'd sell them, buy them, sell them. Brilliant, all going absolutely amazingly well. I mean, there was even at one point we were the sole UK stockists of a bottling they did, a charity bottling for I think it was a guy called Ben Bowers, I think. Dram a day, I think, something like that. Anyway, so we were the sole retailers for that bottling, and the profits were split between his charity and the Gauntlet's charity, the Jessica Hope Foundation. And if memory serves me right, I believe it was an Ardmore finished in an ex-Islay cask, which nowadays is pretty much ubiquitous. Every bloody bottling of Ardmore has been finished in an ex-Islay cask, but back then not quite so usual. I mean, I might stick my head on the block and say that it was actually the first time I'd come across an Ardmore that had been finished in an ex-Islay cask. Now, whether that was Jack and Adrian's doing, I don't know. Maybe it was. Maybe they bought the cask as was. Maybe they actually thought about doing that. If they did do that, then obviously they were a bit ahead of the game, so to speak. Anyway, so like I said, that we had a fruitful working relationship for a few years, and then pretty much like all marriages, along came the divorce. Oh yes, and I've been there and I've done that, bought the t-shirt, so yes, call me cynical if you wish. But yes, so the divorce came along, and they stopped sending samples. I forget when that was, I think it was before lockdown. And it's okay. Look, I understand it's a business at the end of the day, the whole thing. And it's expensive to send out samples. You've got to crack open a bottle for a start. You've got to buy sample bottles, postage, etc., etc. And when you've got sort of the bigger UK boys that are happy to buy without having to sample, and then you've got European markets that are quite happy to take whatever you're going to give them, it suddenly becomes sort of a bit of a a waste of money, really, at the end of the day, sending out samples. You know, you might get a small order back, you might actually get no order at all, you know. So, yeah, these things happen, and I understand. It's part of the business. So one independent goes, there's another one coming along to get into bed with, so to speak, and the whole cycle kind of like continues, shall we say, and it's just the way of those things anyway. So back before Christmas, I get an email from a chap called Tom, who I think is the new sales director for Claxton's, and obviously he wants to sort of like, you know, make sales. That's what sales directors do. So what do when you're a brand new guy on the block, so to speak? You basically have a look at your customer base and look at who purchased and is not purchasing anymore, and you try and find out why. So yes, got a lovely email from back before Christmas and explained everything, and and he said leave it with me. And so a few weeks ago, I get another email back saying, this is our current range, are you interested? So I took a look at what they were doing, and they're basically still doing the single cask bottlings in the sort of very Art Deco-y kind of bottles, and but they've now appeared to have introduced a cheaper range called the Exploration Series, bottled at 50%, no different from what a number of other independents do. So I picked out 6 from each of the 2 ranges. Well, I've got the Grain Barn, which technically is on its own, but I've kind of lumped it in with the Exploration Series. And so I'm going to look at these 6 samples of Exploration Series this week, and then next week I shall look at what they're now calling Warehouse Number 1, which is the original, if you like, cask strength bottlings. So yeah, I picked 6 which I thought were that looked interesting on paper anyway. Obviously the juice in the bottle is what counts here, so it might look interesting on paper, might not be quite so interesting when we actually get to taste them. Who knows? That's always the fun of these things, and this, just like I said, this is why I always insist on samples. You know, if you want to send me samples, if you want me to stock your stuff, then brilliant, I'll taste them and, you know, see if, you know, they float my boat, so to speak. If you're not happy sending samples, well, fine. It's just the way of these things, isn't it? So anyway, I think that's enough kind of waffle. So let's take a look at today's lineup. Okay, so we're going to kick off with the Grain Barn bottling. This is a 30-year-old single grain, bottled at 48%. And as you know, I'm a big fan of old grain whiskies. Yes, all right, you can argue they sometimes don't have the complexity of a single malt, but generally speaking, they are remarkably good value for money when you think about it. I mean, this 30-year-old spirit, if this was a single malt, you'd be paying an awful lot more than what you're paying for this. This is retailing around about 85 quid or there or thereabouts. So on paper, looks really, really good value. Bottling number 2, the first of the single malts, is a Lowland bottling, a Lowland distilled. I believe, I'm assuming I can say where it's come from, although it doesn't state it on the label, but it's a Dalrymple, which apparently is teaspooned Islay. This is an 8-year-old, bottled at 50%. Distilled in April of 2012, bottled in March of last year, and has spent, I believe, its entire life in a ruby port barrique. So as you can see, quite heavily coloured. So we'll see if there's any distillery character in that one, shall we? Moving on, this is a 8-year-old Blair Athol, and again, look at the colour of that. Wholly aged in, well, I'm assuming, judging from the colour, a first fill brandy barrique. It was distilled in August of 2015, bottled in November of last year, and is an 8-year-old. Moving on to something with a little bit of age, this is a 14-year-old Glen Elgin, ex-sherry butt. I would guess, judging from the colour, you're looking at probably a refill sherry butt. So distilled in July of 2006, bottled in March of 2021 and 50% like all of the others. Penultimate bottling is an Orkney. This is an 8-year-old Highland Park. Deep intake of breath, young Highland Park. Okay. Ex-Bourbon Hoggy, distilled in December of 2012, bottled in October of 2021. And the final bottling is an Islay. They've called Trails End. Not quite sure what that means, but I'm sure somebody will tell me. Apparently this is an Ardbeg. Now that is quite unusual. Obviously it's been sold, assuming these are all single cask bottlings. It was a question I forgot to ask. They might be single cask, they might be batches, I don't know. I'm going to assume that they're single casks, so this is probably sold as a not as an Ardbeg, hence why they haven't used Ardbeg on the label. So distilled in January of 2017, bottled in November of this year, and it's aged in a bourbon barrel. So it's a 6-year-old Ardbeg. So yeah, that should be a fun one to finish with. But before we do that, let's kick off with a bit of rain. Right, okay, so this is the Grain Barn 30-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Dense, mature, lots of that sawdusty American oak, baked apple, autumnal fruit, earthy spice, vanilla, earthy vanilla. A little bit of a crispness coming through as well. Now, it is a single grain. It's one of the more weightier single grains. I'm kind of thinking Strathclyde, possibly. Don't think it's North British. That could probably end up turning out to be North British, and then I'll go, what the hell do I know? But it's quite a weighty, it's one of the more weightier grain distilleries. Like I say, a bit Strathclyde. Caledonian kind of comes to mind as well. I don't know if is Caledonian still in existence. I honestly don't know. So it's got a lovely toastiness. There's some charred wood, a touch of burnt wood. Lovely balance, really nicely balanced. Not too over oaky. Don't get oodles of that sort of coconutty kind of American oak. I'm guessing obviously a vatting of casks, so they've obviously been able to sort of like tweak the oak input, one imagines. But yeah, I mean, brilliant value for money, I think, at the end of the day. Let's see what the pass on. Again, dense, rich, baked apple, autumnal fruits, lovely crisp, grainy finish there. Bringing along some spices, really juicy, really full. Again, not too over oak, little bit of vanilla. Love the finish. Like I said, starts off really rich and full, and then tails off into the sort of more slightly nippier, crisper grain notes. And you know what, I mean, I like that. I thought that was a very impressive bottling, great value for money, and I'm more than happy if I had my Gauntley's hat on, and obviously remember that any comments I make during today's episode of the show are wholly my own and have no bearing on the company that employs me, just in case. But yes, if I had my Gauntley's hat on, I would be more than happy to stick that on the shelf and sell that to you guys. Okay, so let's move on to the Lowland 8-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Even though I'm sniffing as hard as hell, do I get any distillery character? Do I get any spirit character at all? No. It's Port City. It's porty, it's red fruits, it's sweet red fruits. There's a slight syrupiness there as well. There's a little bit of marzipan, a little bit of straw. Dare I say it? There's an edginess there. So yeah, maybe I am getting a little bit of spirit character, but you know, it's kind of, yeah. Now, if I was being really written, no, I'm not going to be that. It's just it's too much oak. It's too much port. You know, it is. It's just kind of one-dimensional, and yeah, let's see what that's like. Oh, that's a bit of a hard finish, a bit stringent, a bit short as well, a bit young, a bit overly porty again, a bit of straw, a bit of dried red fruit. Oh God, Jesus, those tannins are bitter. Yeah, again, it is all about the cask, and it's sort of like, you know, another one of those, like, you look at it and you think, right, okay, so you've aged a Lowland in a wine cask for its entire life. It might have displayed some distillery character. I have discovered some that have done in the past, but you know, you kind of look at it and you think, no, it's probably going to be all cask, and well, yep, it was.
I was yours and you were mine.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Blair Athol, 8-year-old Blair Athol, first fill brandy barrique. Yeah, I can smell that brandy barrique. It's got sort of acerbic, apple, fortified brandy notes. There's a little bit of oily barley. You can feel the kind of Blair Athol weight. But it's kind of, again, it's all very, very heavy on the brandy. It's almost, the brandy is almost kind of flattening it, if you like. Now, I mean, there are some people that will probably enjoy this, like some people would probably really love the Lowland bottling. But for me, again, I'm just not getting any real distillery character. I'm getting a sensation of Blair Athol because I know what Blair Athol is like. But, you know, again, it's all about the cask. Now, I mean, if this was me, I would have vatted this together with maybe a couple of barrels of unfinished Blair Athol, just to kind of balance it all out. Maybe they didn't have those kind of casks available, although, I mean, nowadays, I mean, I believe they've got several thousand casks now. I mean, you know, Claxton's are not a small company anymore. So, you know, for me, you know, if I was doing this, I would obviously do things my way, whether that's kind of the correct way or not. But, you know, for me, I would have vatted this together and just come up with something a little bit more balanced. Anyway, let's see what that's like. A little bit fresher on the palate. I'm getting more youthful spirit, a little bit of rose petal. The brandy fortified sort of appley notes come through on the mid palate and I would say linger, but it kind of is a little bit on the masked side. In actual fact, the alcohol is quite intrusive. There's some burnt biscuits. Again, I'm not convinced about the balance of it. The balance, I would say, is a little better on the palate, but even so, it's not really exciting me, it has to be said. Right, okay, so a little drop of water has kind of pushed back the brandy cask, which I would have expected. I'm getting a little bit more oily, fuller, fatter Blair Athol character, but again, it's 8 years old. It's not got a huge amount of complexity. Let's see what that's like there. Again, yeah, the palate, same. A little bit more of the Blair Athol character, although it's got this kind of slight edge, not wholly industrial, but kind of moving towards that sort of end of the spectrum. It's still a bit on the short side. It's now kind of like emphasised the sort of drying tannins on the finish, and so it is pretty short, it has to be said. So overall, slightly sort of more impressive than the Lowland, but it's still just a bit too much cask and not enough trousers. Okay, so let's move on to the Glen Elgin. So 14 years old, it's sherry butt. Ooh, now that is a lovely nose. Let's put it this way. You're going to have to go quite some distance to cock up bloody Glen Elgin. It has to be said. It is one of those really, really consistent distilleries. I have come across, should we say, poor bottlings of Glen Elgin, but you know, they are very few and far between. So this is obviously, to me, a refill sherry butt, quite well refilled, because it's got a lovely fruity, almost estery nose. It's got that rich honeyed Glen Elgin character, a touch of sherry dried fruits, and just a little bit of raisinated fruit, ginger, green apple, getting a little bit of gooseberry as well now. Now that is a lovely complex nose, and that is how you do sherry at the end of the day. I mean, you know, is it rocket science? No, it's not rocket science. It's all about balance. I mean, I go on and on and on and on and on about it, but it's basically a case of I would like to have I'd like to know what the distillery is trying to tell me. I'd like some distillery character augmented by the cask, and this is a textbook example of it. Now, maybe it's because it's spent long enough in the cask, maybe it's because the cask was well used. I suspect it's a combination of the two things. And so it comes down to the fact that sometimes whiskies are bottled too young. Sometimes you just have to leave them, you know. And then you get something as damn gorgeous as this. It's just, like I said, it's not rocket science. It's just damn good whiskey. Let's see what the power's like. Damn, that is beautiful. I mean, that is silky, it's soft, it's smooth, it's mature. It tastes a lot older than 14. Generously fruity, sort of apricot, apple, green apple, pear, lovely dusty mature oak, a touch of sherry dried fruits, a little bit of spice, a little bit of ginger, a little bit of pepper. Gets a little herbal, oloroso-y on the finish. Don't think it really needs any water at all. It has a piquancy on the finish. I love that sort of slight sort of spicy sort of like burst on the finish. That sort of the alcohol is emphasising that. I mean, that is just a beautiful whiskey at the end of the day. It's a whiskey that I'm more than happy to drink. I'm more than happy to sell to you guys, because I think you really should buy this, because it's beautiful. No, nothing else to say really. Right, okay, on to the 8-year-old Orkney. So, young Highland Park, modern Highland Park. Okay, right, on the positives, it's not cardboardy. It's actually pretty clean. Yes, there's some youthful off the stills notes. There's some rich fruit, apricot, touch of peach smoke, quite salty. There's an edginess there. I mean, it is modern Highland Park after all. It is, you know, they do kind of push those poor old stills, it has to be said. Well, in my personal opinion, that's what they do. There's a little bit of an astringency there. Okay, it's kind of a nose, it's kind of, how to say this, for modern Highland Park it's actually pretty good, but it's not Highland Park as I remember it, if you see what I mean. You know, I could go on all day about how bloody good the old Highland Park 12-year-old was, but so, you know, I give it its dues. It's not a bad cask, it has to be said, maybe this is a bit of an outlier, who knows. I mean, it's been a long time since I've tasted Highland Park. Maybe I ought to do an episode on Highland Park, you know, dig out some old single cask bottlings, and I know I've got some distillery bottling samples knocking about somewhere, so maybe I should grab a bottle of the 12-year-old and yeah, torture myself with it. Anyway, coming back to this. Let's see what that's on. No, that's really short. Quite malty though. I mean, it's modern Highland Park again. There's a stringency there. There's a sort of a roughness there. It's not too rough though. There's some off the still notes. It's relatively clean. There's some oily peat. There's some barley. There's some, yeah. It's all right. Okay. It's kind of. It's not as it's not as rough as hell. I mean, it is what it is. It is modern Highland Park. Maybe a bit more barley now. Put a little drop of water with it. Maybe it's a bit oilier. It's this kind of metallic note. You know, it's not a poor cask. It's very, very, I think, indicative of the current production of Highland Park. Basically, it's not a bad bottling, but it is modern Highland Park at the end of the day. So it's for some people who have never sort of known how damn good Highland Park once was. You know, you will kind of go, well, all right, it's okay. But for those of us that remember, you know, Highland Park as it was, it's a very poor shadow of itself. Anyway, let's see what passes on. Oilier, fuller, still got that edge to it, that sort of slight roughness in the background. I mean, you know, okay, play on your Viking heritage, you know, at least it's not as rough as the Vikings jockstrap, but it's getting there. So as a bottling of current Highland Park, it's okay. It's probably not as bad as some I have tasted, it has to be said. But it's certainly not something that I'm, you know, it's cause I wouldn't recommend it. It's not something I would want to sell at the end of the day, and that's not because it's a bad bottling by Claxton. It's because of what it actually is. As a sort of like, you know, as a bottling of modern Highland Park, it's not too bad at all, but it's just not something to really get excited about. Right, let's move on to the Trail's End. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? That says Ardbeg to me. Rich, oily, woody, green wood, sort of burnt wood, rich apricot, medicinal. It's actually quite medicinal for Ardbeg. A little bit of white fruit. Lovely intensity. I mean, it just kind of like, you know, you love your Islers. Yeah, that kind of like, that ticks all the boxes. A little bit of pepper as well. I mean, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, we all know Ardbeg produces bloody good spirit. That we might not like Ardbeg because of the branding, the marketing, or the sort of like the noise, shall we say. Strip away all of that, and you think, you know what, the spirit is actually pretty damn good. All right, yeah, the distillery bottlings are becoming slightly expensive, and I forget what this is retailing for. I think this is 60 something odd, but that's in and around what the wee beastie is retailing for. And you know what? The wee beastie has wrinkles. I don't think this has wrinkles. I think this is absolutely lovely. I'd be more than happy to purchase a bottle of this. Let's see what that's like. damn, that comes through well on the finish. It is all about the finish. It kind of starts off really quite slowly. Yes, you get the sort of medicinal peat, the woodiness, the rich apricot, the apple, the barley, and then on the mid palate we start to get quite sooty, and wow, that salt comes in and the peat comes in, and you're just going, oh my god, that's a hell of a finish. I'll have a bottle of that. I don't care whether you buy it or not, I'll have one. It's barbecuey, it's slightly meaty. There's a slight meatiness there, not as meaty as some. It's not as kind of like, you know, barbecue sauce, but it has a sort of barbecue kind of woodiness, I suppose. I mean, it is pretty much spot on classic Ardbeg, it has to be said. You know, at a young age, it has the intensity, it has the woodiness, it has the richness. I mean, it's just a damn good bottle of whiskey at the end of the day. If you love peated whiskies, of course. If you don't love peated whiskies, you're not going to love it. You know, it's as simple as that. But for me, absolutely superb. What a way to end a finish. What a way to end a finish. What a way to end a tasting, I should say. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Tom from Claxton's for the samples for today's episode of the show, and obviously next week's episode as well. You know, on the whole, I mean, you know, I'm glad that sort of, you know, they've kind of got back in touch. I mean, it's they're no different really, I suppose, at the end of the day from any other independent bottling company. They bottle, I think, some really interesting and some good whiskies, and they bottle some, for me anyway, less than interesting and great whiskies. But you know, it's like I said, you know, it's it's me, you know, it's just the way I kind of roll, as I say. The grain barn I really liked. I thought that was an impressive grain, lovely maturity, pretty much did what it said on the label, great value for money. Yes, it's still expensive, it's a 30-year-old spirit, what do you expect? But I think, you know, if you want bang for your buck, that has it. The Lowlands, all cask and no trousers, not something that interests me whatsoever, and I can say exactly the same for the Blair Athol. Okay, yes, it's being a bit different, it's being a bit interesting, and certainly I suppose if you're into that type of whiskey, it's fine. It's the quality is pretty damn good, but for me, at the end of the day, both of them just had far too much cask character and not enough input from the actual spirit itself. So yeah, doesn't get a tick from me, as they say. The Glen Elgin, on the other hand, just was absolutely stunning. It was everything that I want in a whiskey. It was balanced. It had lovely maturity, probably more maturity than you would expect from a whiskey of that kind of age. And I forget what I would have to retail it for, but buy it. The Highland Park, it's kind of like, I suppose, a tale of two halves, or a tale of two cities, if you like. No, that made no sense at all, did it? Forget what I just said. It's a tale of two halves at the end of the day. It's kind of, it is modern Highland Park. It is what it is. It's probably a good bottling of modern Highland Park. So if you were to buy that, you would probably say that was a lot superior to the distillery 12-year-old. But it's not going to excite me at all. It's not got the interest. It's not what Highland Park should be and could be. So that is more of a detriment to the distillery rather than the Claxtons that have actually bottled it. And there are people that love Highland Park, so you know, it's kind of, it's not my bag. And the Trail's End, I mean, that was stunning. I mean, you know, that really was a very good whiskey. I mean, it was classic Ardbeg, and you know, it's kind of, I suppose, you just have to sort of like forget names. I know people get tied up in distillery names and all that kind of stuff, and sometimes you just have to go, look, It doesn't have Ardbeg on the label, but it is Ardbeg, and my God, it's bloody good. Just buy it. Trust me on this one, you know. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Some of these kind of whiskies, like the Trail's End, you have to basically hand sell, and to be able to hand sell them, you have to be able to taste them, to sort of say to customers, like, this is a bloody good whiskey. It's kind of Ardbeg. It doesn't say it, but it is really, and it's bloody good. And that's where we're at the end of the day. So so yeah, good stuff. So big thank you to Tom for the samples for today's episode of the show. Like I said, next week I will be looking at the Warehouse 1 bottlings, the single cask stuff. So all that's left to say for today is good afternoon, and good dramming.